Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, folks. Number 2 of 2 shows today. This one is all about the 2nd Division, US 2nd Division in Normandy. I hope you stay tuned earlier to see Alina talk about the first transport to Auschwitz. It was very sombering and rather sad to hear some of those stories, but important history. But today we are talking about Normandy again, and the events we are talking about happened 77 years ago today. Well, they culminated 77 years ago today. They've been started a few days earlier. So my guest is, I'm falling back on an old friend again, someone I've known for 20 years. In fact, at one point he used to work for me, which is rather exciting. Gerd van den Bogaert, who is a Belgian tour guide living in Normandy. Good afternoon, good evening, Gerd.
Good evening, Paul.
And we are experiencing a few audio issues in the sense that I can hear Gert clearly, you can hear me clearly, but for some reason Gert can't hear me very clearly. So if he says, "Can you repeat that, Paul?" It's not because he's stupid, it's because he can't hear properly. So we'll I hope we'll be okay. But as long as we're all off we've known each other a long time, it'll be fine, everybody. So I've asked you to be on a show for a long time, Gert, and it's taken a year before you finally came on, and we've chosen the American 2nd Division, and we'll explain as the show goes on your connection with that division and why you find it particularly interesting. But this is part of Attrition and Beyond the Beach Week, which is that part post D-Day where we've talked about it on the other shows. The Allies are landing divisions on a daily basis. The Germans are bringing reinforcements on an almost daily basis, and we're encountering this different terrain inland. So we're talking about the bocage, about the hedgerows and rivers today. So Gert has provided, as all my guests, a PowerPoint. We've got his images, his maps, and also footage I took last week. Now, we couldn't do this show live from the location because it is an absolute internet dead zone down there. There is no mobile signal there whatsoever. So I took some footage in advance. And what we're doing first, and I'll let Gert start talking about the 2nd Division, is play a bit of a footage driving towards our first location. And we will tell you what our first location is a little bit later on. We're going to get to it, and then Gert's going to relate a story about what happened there. But just when you're watching the video, and I'll have Gert talk in a minute, this is the rolling countryside of Normandy when you get about 10 miles inland from Omaha Beach, from the other gold beaches, Juno Beach. The countryside changes a bit. So this is a video we're playing now up to our first stop. So Gert, tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking today without telling anybody what we're doing yet exactly. Just sort of kind of set the scene about the 2nd Division in Normandy. Can you hear me, Gert?
Oh, Woody, I can barely hear you. You're really breaking up, and I can hear like 1 out of 4 words. So I'm going to try my best here. Obviously, I'll be able to fill in a lot of the footage and pictures that you'll be showing, but maybe I won't be able to answer all of the questions. But maybe this short drive that we're taking in, I can't remember if it was my car or your car, but this short drive that we're taking gives me an opportunity maybe to tell me a little bit more why you've asked me to do this presentation about the 2nd Infantry Division. As you said, I'm not a historian. I'm a guide. I've been a battlefield guide for 20 years, museum guide, cemetery guide, and it was during my time at the Normandy American Cemetery that I got a particular interest in the 2nd Infantry Division, and it was mainly due to a personal connection that I had, because the very first war orphan that I ever escorted to the grave of her father was a lady whose father had served in the 2nd Infantry. And it turned out that he was one of 49 Distinguished Service Cross recipients who are commemorated there at the Normandy American Cemetery, so out of 10,000. So kind of a rarity. And what was even more rare was that was the day that he got killed, and the location that he got killed, which immediately triggered an interest, because I soon realized that this particular individual, this soldier who had, committed that act of bravery on that particular day, at that particular spot, was part of a story that maybe had not really been highlighted yet. Definitely not a hidden story. I don't like those, hidden story scenarios or things that are concealed deliberately. But there was something to be told there, and so that brought me to this village. And we actually went to the village, and I asked you to go to this house, the very first stop we made when we went to the village. And I wanted to start here because for all my research that I did in this village, this was one of those kind of poignant stories that was very very typical of the experience in the hedgerows in those first few days after D-Day, both on the American side, because we're obviously focusing on the American sector, and on the civilian side, because as you can see, it's just it's a country house, it's a farmhouse, and it belonged to the Lavallee family who lived in this particular village. And the Lavallées, Mr. and Mrs. Lavallee, and their daughter Charlotte, lived there with Mr. Lavallee's brother, who was a refugee who had actually arrived in Cerise-la-Forêt in 1940 from Le Havre. Cerise counted over 100 refugees from all over, many of them from Cherbourg. You know, they've been evacuated and been taken there. Actually, I think I just gave away the name of the town, but that's okay. But anyway, so the Lavallées were in that house while during several days there was heavy combat waging nearby, and they could hear the firing and the fighting kind of approach, gunfire, the odd explosion, and they were kind of huddled in the corner of a room all together, hoping that the storm would pass by and that they would come through it and out of it alive. As they heard troops approach, they heard screams, and suddenly there was a smash in the window and a large explosion. The room was filled with dust and smoke, and there was obvious confusion. American soldiers had just thrown a grenade in through one of the back windows, and by some miracle, the Lavallées were unhurt or unharmed. But of course, they were in shock and panic. They were dazed, and they ran out the house in the courtyard that you saw in the image of the back of the house, and faced this hedgerow right there on the corner. And so, unfortunately for them, they found themselves in between the two fighting parties. The one hand, those American soldiers who just thrown the grenade inside the building, and behind the hedgerow, the Germans who were defending the area. And so, small arms fire opened up, and a burst of machine gun fire hit Mr. Lavallee in the abdomen. He was virtually killed instantly. Charlotte, Mr. and Mrs. Lavallee's daughter, received a single bullet through the throat, and she kind of collapsed in that same courtyard. And her mother, Isabel, kind of in shock, ran out to both victims, and had enough time to hold her daughter in her arms, and basically listen to her last words as she died in her arms. And so this is one of the stories that I discovered during my research about this particular village. And when I started doing the research, I had no idea that I would find a story like this, because in a lot of the official history written about this particular village, kind of nothing happened. And it was quite the contrary. Actually, a lot happened there, and it happened for a lot longer than what the official history might indicate. So obviously, I think I gave away, in my excitement, I gave away the name of the village. But Paul, I think we had the idea of asking viewers tonight, some of them who are familiar with the 2nd Infantry Division, others maybe discover their story, but asking them what village this particular incident took place in.
Yeah,
and of course,
I'll jump in, Gerd. I hope you can hear me. So, folks who are watching, we know we have a really good audience on World War II TV. You know your stuff. Whether the 2nd Division has ever been one of the units you've studied, I don't know. But I'm going to ask you, when I say 2nd Division, or we say 2nd Division Normandy, what battle is the one that comes to mind? And please, we want a bit of interactivity now. Put your comments now. If you want to come in immediately with a guess, put your guess in about the most costly battle the 2nd Division fought in Normandy. And if you can't get it without some suggestions, I'll give you 3 suggestions, and we'll see which one you're going to come up with. But please, just type away with your first instinct, your first impression of the 2nd Division's toughest campaign in Normandy, when they suffered the most casualties. And I'm waiting to see if any comments come in. No comments yet so far. We'll see where it is. But the 3 options, so I'm hoping there's still going to be some comments coming in. So option number 1 is straight off the beach and the town, Saint-Lô. So we've had Saint-Lô twice. Okay, Saint-Lô has come in. More specifically, I was expecting people to say Hill 192. Hill 192, I suppose, is counted as Saint-Lô. It's a few miles away from Saint-Lô. The other one would be Trevier, which is just off Omaha. Well, not just off Omaha. It's a few miles inland from Omaha Beach, and there's some pretty graphic photos of dead GIs in the village there that people may be familiar with. Anyone else got any guesses? So Hill 192, Saint-Lô, Trevier. Well, in fact, we're talking about Cerisy-le-Forêt today, and I expect some of you won't even have heard of Cerisy-le-Forêt, although Gert did give it away in the presentation there. Trevier. So we had two people, Gert. Trevier from Mag, Trevier from Tonne. Okay, so in fact, that's not the case. Now, this is a fascinating graph. So explain this this graph, Gert.
Yeah, so the graph is interesting because
we've got documentation and we've got a graph. That's graph, documentation.
Documentation, right? Yeah, because during my research, which started in 2007, so we're closing up to 15 years of kind of digging into this particular story. I went to the National Archives and Records Administration in College Park, Maryland, twice to look up records for the 2nd Infantry Division, and in particular the 38th Infantry Regiment. And when I found this particular document, which showed the casualties for the 38th Infantry Regiment, what struck me was letter B there. For those of you familiar with the 2nd Infantry Division, I bet you have never heard of the Cerisy offensive. You have likely heard of the Cerisy Forest. You have maybe heard of the town of Cerisy-le-Forêt. But the Cerisy offensive is definitely not something that you will read about often. Not even in the divisional history, although Cerisy is obviously mentioned, it's not an offensive. Trevier maybe rings more a bell. I saw a few people talked about Trevier, Saint-Lô, and of course attached to that Hill 192, which was a strategic battle for the taking of Saint-Lô. But Cerisy kind of, was that there was an offensive was kind of unknown. And if you look at the casualty numbers there, the figures, Trevier, probably one of the most well-known towns liberated by the 2nd Infantry Division. I'll tell you a little bit more about why, mostly because it was the first. But we have, there are 105 officers and enlisted men casualty during that battle. And if you look at the Cerisy offensive, we're over 600, right? We're over 600. And even if you then look to Saint-Georges-d'Elle, Hill 192, very famous battles, and really where the attrition took place, because that took weeks to finally take that hill. Even if you add up those numbers, you're still below the Cerisy offensive. And so when I discovered this the first time, which was 2011, so 10 years ago, I couldn't believe it. I said, well, wait a minute, why is there no other mention of a Cerisy offensive? So I really wanted to dig a little deeper, and I wanted to find out why there was even mention of a Cerisy offensive. What's interesting is that this offensive kind of took place at a time where supposedly not much was happening, quote unquote, for the 2nd Infantry Division. If you look at Saint-Georges-d'Elle, Hill 192, we're basically looking at starting on 13 June, late 13 June, 14 June, and then, all the way to 11 July. Well, this is an interesting graph that I got from a veteran I met a number of years ago, John Gill, who was a medic in the 2nd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment. And as a medic, he was particularly interested in the number of people that were killed and wounded. And he created this graph that showed the killed, men killed in action for the 38th Infantry Regiment throughout basically 60 days that the 2nd Division spent in Normandy. And in the middle of the graph, you see that the 11th of July, the taking of Hill 192, that last push, which is extensively written about. To the right, you actually see the breakout in Saint-Jean-de-Bezons, which again is not very well known. Those 2-3 days there in July, you see they're all the way to the right. But then there's this one day on the left in June, early June, basically within a week after D-Day. The 13 June really kind of sticks out. Out of 60 days for the 2nd Division, this was the 4th worst day for the division. And it was not from taking Saint-Georges-d'Elle. It was not from trying to get up Hill 192. They actually even haven't gotten past the main obstacle, which is going to be kind of a focus for today, on those first few days, which was the Elle River, right? And that's how I discovered that the crossing of the Elle River in Cerisy-le-Forêt took basically 4 days. Liberating the entire village of Cerisy-le-Forêt and crossing the Elle River took 4 days. You can see Cerisy-la-Forêt right there on a kind of the bigger map. I think everybody's kind of familiar with Normandy. If we zoom in a little bit, Paul, on the next map, you're going to be able to see a little bit more detail. That little red dot there. Interesting is the gray line. That's the border between the Calvados and the Manche. You know, those two départements. And you can see kind of Cerisy-la-Forêt kind of sticks out like a thumb into the Calvados region, but it is the Manche. And you see that little bit of green there just to the bottom right of that red dot, which is the Cerisy Forest, which maybe people are more familiar with. And St. Lo, obviously not that far, but we're still north of Hill 192, and of course several miles northeast of St. Lo. And if you zoom in a little further and have a look at what Cerisy-la-Forêt looks like, you really start understanding why this battle took so long. If you look at the center of this map, you can see that little cluster, which is the center of town. Cerisy is basically a street village. It's over a mile long, and so it's one street, and there's kind of houses and stores, all aligned along those. But then you have all these little hamlets that surround the center of town, and they go as far north as 3 miles. Even the furthest they're southwest, about 3.5 miles from the center of town. And for people who are familiar with Normandy and who have been to Normandy, many of them stay in the town of Bayeux, which is a very popular town. About 15,000 people live in Bayeux. Bayeux is about 7 square miles. The town of Cerisy, where about 1,200 people live, is about 9 square miles. So this is a really, really big town. There you can see Bayeux there. And you see how big it is on the map. Well, Cerisy, the territory that covers Cerisy, is actually larger than Bayeux. And so you have there are over 30 different hamlets scattered all over the territory of Cerisy-la-Forêt. And many of them are clustered along that blue line that you see on the bottom left, which is the Elle River, right? And again, if we continue and go a little further with the next map that you have, actually this is the aerial shot of the town, the center of town. If you go to Cerisy, and all the signs will take you there. The center of town, but you will not really get the feeling that once you venture out into the countryside that still is part of the town, but it definitely is. Actually, people who lived in Cerisy in those little hamlets really relied on the town center, because that's where all the stores were, and anything you couldn't get on the farm you would get there in the center of town. I took out the IGN map, which you see on the left, and on the top right, you see Cerisy-la-Forêt. That's where the center of town is. And you can kind of see where the Elle runs, towards the Cerisy forest. And you see all those little hamlets. You can see them by name. They're kind of really scattered all across. And there's a picture there of one of the hamlets. This is actually Village de l'Étang, which is actually on the northern side of town. But it shows you what one of those hamlets look like. You've got a cluster of houses, 3-4 farm buildings. Sometimes it even went down to just one farm. And you see the hedgerows and the orchards and the narrow roads and typical Normandy countryside. But multiply that by 30, over 9 square miles, and you have an idea of what Cerisy looked like. So you already can get an idea that liberating the town of Cerisy was going to take way more effort than just liberating the center of town. So that's maybe kind of to give you an idea of the topography and the setting and the time era that we're talking about. Cerisy-la-Forêt is very well known for its abbey, its 5th century abbey. Actually, in my research, I found that the abbey actually was on the list of the monuments men. That's one of those monuments that had to be protected because it was such a rich architectural heritage in Normandy. And actually, when the monuments men arrived in Cerisy, they were rather happy to see that the men who had set up their dry quarters in the abbey had kind of left those and left the abbey unscathed, and there was no war damage there, because the center of town really wasn't damaged during the battle. And we'll go into that a little deeper later on. Actually, you'll see the memorial there for the liberation of the town of Cerisy on the 10th of June. There's a little memorial there that was erected in the 1990s. The main street was renamed Rue Indian Head, or Indian Head, of course, the 2nd Infantry Division, referred to as the Indian Head Division. So basically no battle damage, a small monument that tells you that the town was liberated on the 10th of June, street named after it, And most of the writings about Cerisy-la-Forêt leave it at that, right? The town was liberated on the 10th of June. But what about those hamlets? What about the rest of the territory that covered Cerisy-la-Forêt? That will take until the 13th. Actually, the story that I told you at the beginning of the La Valais, they are considered to be the last civilian casualties of the fighting in Cerisy-la-Forêt, as beyond their farm, we kind of enter Saint-Georges-d'Elle and move closer towards Hill 192. So the first question, obviously, if we go back a little bit, Paul, the first question, before I tell you a little bit more about the old market here, maybe, the first question I had was, well, why wasn't this story covered, right? And I think in part the 2nd Division history, which I have here behind me, kind of contributed to it. Because, of course, they had a look at the overall efforts of the 2nd Division throughout the Second World War. And it is true that if you look at 3 or 4 days, then, they don't really jump out as much as maybe some of the things that did, that lasted longer, the Battle of Hill 192, or even later, the Battle of the Bulge, which is covered extensively. And so there is some attention to Trevier because it was the first village liberated. And then there's a short paragraph, half a page, about liberating Cerisy, and then it goes straight into Hill 192. So the 2nd Division division history didn't really help highlighting what happened in Cerisy. I think another reason is that because the battle lasted from 10 to 13 June, a lot of other stuff was going on. You have covered on many shows, Paul, what happened at Carentan. A little tank engagement took place at a place called Villers-Bocage, which has gotten a lot of attention. You had your show on Manille-Patrie, and I think the Canadians and their efforts against the 12th SS have gotten quite a lot of attention. So it kind of fell in the cracks of the story of the Battle of Normandy. And I think another element that also played maybe was that there was another division that crossed the Elle, and which kind of covered it quite extensively in their history, and that was the 29th Division. And so the 29th Infantry Division, they had quite a bit of history written about the crossing of the Elle. There actually has been a memorial there for over 20 years now at Saint-Jean-de-Savigny, because after the crossing of the Elle, it kind of stops for them, and they kind of participate obviously at Hill 192, but that's really a focus on the 2nd Division. And then for the 29th, it kind of shifts a little bit more Villiers-Fossard, but obviously Martinville Ridge taking Saint-Lô. So these were a variety of reasons why I think Cerisy-la-Forêt and that Cerisy offensive had been overlooked. And you can even make the argument that the Cerisy offensive started on the 7th of June. And that leads me to the next image, Paul, that you had up just earlier. This is a picture of the old meat market in Cerisy-la-Forêt. And if you go to Cerisy today, you won't find that there anymore, because on the 7th of June, Cerisy was targeted by the Allied Tactical Air Forces. And the two main crossroads, this particular one leading to Balleroy and the Cerisy Forest, which the Allies feared would be used as an assembly area for German armor and a potential counterattack. This crossroads was bombed. The St. Clair-sur-Elle crossroads was also bombed, and it led to several civilian casualties, 15 in total, as far as the bombing is concerned. German movements from Cerisy towards the coast were immediately spotted by Allied air forces, and this is one of the kind of the rare pieces of evidence of battle damage in Cerisy-la-Forêt that you see here on the kind of just below the roof of this house. Those are likely 7.62 or maybe 20 millimeter slugs that went into that house, because I spoke to several eyewitnesses who saw the plane that fired those rounds as it was strafing a German truck that was coming up the road through Cerisy, and actually stayed burning on the side of the road with two dead carbonized bodies in the ditch for several days. And so Cerisy was being targeted as early as the 7th because of its strategic importance close to the forest, and then of course near the Elle and the foot of Hill 192. Here you see the center of town, that main street that goes right through. That's where you see the area here where just before, and maybe not getting the footage in real time, but where the bomb fell at the crossroads in St. Clair-sur-Elle. Tragic story. The school teacher, the school principal of Cerisy, lost his two little girls in that bombing. They were stuck under the rubble with their mother, who could hear them cry throughout the night until they suffocated, and she was pulled from under the rubble alive, but of course lost her 2 little girls. So terrible story there. Really, the campaign started on the 7th with mainly civilian casualties and some German casualties as well from the strafing. The Germans then decided, not to stay in Cerisy. Actually, they had already kind of prepared to move out of Cerisy. Although there were some Germans left, and here, this footage that you took is basically the area where a few remaining Germans in Cerisy-la-Forêt opened fire on the advancing 2nd Infantry Division troops that kind of moved through the center of town. This bit of info I got from the post-wartime mayor's interview in 1946, and he talks about how these Germans were immediately taken prisoner, and there was not a lot of resistance there for the taking of the town. So the offensive started with the aerial bombardment, and then kind of continued with the taking of the town. And this map kind of shows you how that went. You can see Omaha Beach, obviously where the 2nd Infantry Division came ashore, and then kind of goes further southwest towards St. Lo and Hill 192 and Cerisy just before that. But their first objective for the 2nd Division, you can see that kind of in the center of the image, that is Trevier, just off Omaha Beach inland. And I always like to compare Trevier with St. Mary-Église. Obviously, there were no paratroopers in Trevier, but if you look at St. Mary-Église and its location kind of right behind Utah Beach, just about the same distance as Trevier. It's about the same size towns. Trevier had just over 800, whereas St. Mary-Église a little bit more than 1,000 people living in it at the time. There was a river, that was flooded. The Meurthe was flooded in St. Mary-Église, and here we have the Or, only it was on the other side of the town. In Trevier, you had to cross it to get into the town. And so that was the first objective. And although there were no paratroopers, the advantage of the 2nd Infantry Division was that they got really major support from naval artillery. I mean, you can see some of the damage here that the USS Texas did here, on the 6th and 7th of June, again causing mainly civilian casualties initially. But as German forces were moving to Trevier to try and defend it, elements of the 30th Schneller Brigade, some of them kind of ran into that vicious naval artillery and were obliterated. And although they reached the town and set up their defensive positions before the 2nd Infantry Division got into the town, if you look at it, the battle there started on the 9th, and it was over in less than a day. It was some vicious and tough fighting, some of it house to house. But if you look at the numbers that I showed you earlier, there were 100 casualties for the taking of Trevier, which among all of those offensives was probably the least costly, which is kind of terrible to say when you know that there are over 100 people killed or wounded. But we get this image of Trevier, as probably the bloodiest battle until Hill 192, but it wasn't. Elements in the 2nd and 3rd Battalion took the town, and then the 1st Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment, took over, and man, they just went right cross country. Mainly because the Germans knew that after they lost Trevier, their whole front was at risk, and so the orders were given during the night on the 10th for the 352nd and elements of the 30th Schnell Brigade to fall back, and the next line of defense was going to be the Elle River, and so including the Elle River that you find in Cerisy-la-Forêt. Now, if you look at the distance here, that the 1st Battalion 38 covered, this is on the 10th of June, right? So they're going right through the Cerisy forest. They go through the town. We just saw where they went through the town. They reached the Malbreche crossroads, which is where you see the dark area where the Cerisy forest is. You see that kind of toe sticking out on the left. Well, that's kind of the Malbreche crossroads, and they even went beyond that. So they cut the Bayeux-St. Lo highway. They did it in less than a day. They covered the same distance that Allied troops coming off Omaha Beach had covered in 4 days. So of all of the Allied units, the 2nd Infantry Division had made the deepest penetration inland of any Allied unit. And, we hear that often, the 1st Division getting credit for that. And obviously, by the 13th, 12th, 13th, that was the case. But on 10 and 11 June, the 2nd Infantry Division was, the deepest inland. And you can see that was the case on this on this, as you can see in this map. Actually, they were so far that they got cut off. The 1st Battalion had to set up an all-round defense and had to wait for headquarters to kind of connect with them again. And so at the time, there were some headlines, about taking the Cerisy Forest, and look at that, even it's a bigger headline than the Nazis losing Carentan, right? Which I guess today is kind of the other way around. But so it was a big deal. They got really fast and deep inland and covered a lot of distance. And so there was good hope to cross the Elle and try and start getting up that slope of Hill 192. The problem, however, was logistically things had to kind of catch up, had to follow up, right? And the problem with the 2nd Infantry Division is, if you look at all of the divisions coming ashore between Utah and Omaha Beach in those first 4 or 5 days, it took the 2nd Division probably the longest, not probably, it took the 2nd Division the longest to bring the entire division ashore. And the main reason for that is what happened on Omaha Beach on the 6th. Things being so difficult there, not getting off the beach initially, causing for all that debris and all of that chaos and traffic jams on Omaha Beach in the initial stages. Some of the troops that were supposed to come ashore, D+1, 2, they were still out there in the channel, waiting for a beach master to tell them to come in. And it's going to take 4 days, 7, 8, 9, 10 June for the entire division to come ashore. And of course, some will say, well, what about the 6th? There were some 2nd Division engineers in the Special Engineer Task Force, but we're not counting them. So you could even, if you do count them, you can say it took 5 days. But this is probably one of the most famous pictures for the 2nd Division, right? Them coming ashore at Le Roquet, and many websites and many books, you'll find that this is on D+1, Le Roquet, 2nd Division come ashore. And a lot of credit here to historians that you have had on your show, Paul, Marty Morgan and John McManus, because they did some really thorough research on this picture. And one of the things they discovered is that when you zoom in on this picture, you actually notice that the men on the picture are not carrying Garand rifles. They're carrying the Springfield 1903 bolt-action rifle. And we know that the regimental commander of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, Colonel Fuller, basically had made that decision. Fuller was kind of an old school, officer. He'd been, in World War I. He was a little older than the average regimental commander, and he came up with the idea, obsessed with marksmanship, obviously, to give him these the Springfields, which will later, cause big problems for the 23rd. But we know from the divisional history that the 23rd was the last regiment to come ashore. So this was very likely taken closer towards the 10th of June than it was on the 7th, as is claimed often. You got to think that these guys, the 23rd Regiment, are the ones that are going to have to take over from the 38th, which is already 18 miles inland, right? And so they're going to have to cover all that distance, and obviously with no combat experience like some of the 38th had. Troops of the 2nd Division, as you can see, also landed all over. The previous pictures showed, Le Roquet. The one before that was at Deerville. This one is in Colville. So they landed for 4 days, and they really landed the entire length of Omaha Beach, trying to get up whatever draw was available. Right, so it was kind of really difficult for them to move inland, get off the beach, and that's of course going to have a tremendous effect on what's going to happen next, because it's gonna take time. It's going to be kind of confusion for the 23rd Infantry Regiment going through the hedgerow country, working their way to Cerisy-la-Forêt. Here you can see some of the newspaper clippings at the time. This one showing how the division leads, and then the other clipping is a great clipping that was found by a fantastic group, the Friends of the 2nd Infantry Division, friends from the Czech Republic. Who really, if you want to know more about the 2nd Infantry Division, go to Friends of the 2nd Infantry Division on Facebook, and they have a fantastic group. And this was a particular story about some of the members of the 23rd Regiment getting lost as they're heading towards the front lines, and they kind of don't have immediate contact with the enemy, and they go too far, and they find themselves trapped for more than 10 days, and it takes over 2 weeks to get all of these guys back from behind enemy lines. They drink poisoned water. They're being sniped at. They huddle together. They eat their last ration. It's kind of one of those stories that would be good for a movie. But it's an anecdotal, piece of evidence of how difficult it became for the 23rd Regiment. And the 23rd Infantry Regiment is going to have to now cross the Elle River. Here's one of the pictures of one of the guys that made it back on the 23rd of June after getting lost. But so the 23rd is going to get that mission of crossing the Elle River. Now the problem was that during this time, of course, the Germans are trying to get their reinforcements in place as well. There had been that, kind of organized retreat, if you can call it like that, of the 352nd. But there's also another unit that kind of shows up on the scene, and that's the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, the 3rd German Paratroopers. I mean, these guys obviously, kind of different caliber than what was left of the 352nd. They left Brest. They were put on alert on the 6th. They left Brest. I mean, they marched it. They basically 40 kilometers, 25 miles a day, mostly at night. But there was also a motorized element that got here faster, and it was a Kampfgruppe called Kampfgruppe Alpers, and you see Friedrich Alpers there. You'll see him on both pictures, his portrait to the right, and then him kind of sitting next to Richard Schimpf, the divisional commander. And actually, Schimpf kind of was oversee the departure of that motorized element, and they arrived on as early as the 8th, and Schimpf went to talk to Marx and 84th Corps, and was ready to start moving his paratroopers into the line there. He even wanted to take the Cerisy Forest, but Meindl kind of told him to hold off and just take a defensive position. So, for starting on the 8th, the Germans are gradually starting to put their elements of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger into the line along the Elle River, and so the guys of the 23rd who had been waiting, trying to get out off the beach, marching 18 miles inland, now the following day, on the 12th of June, are going to have to cross the Elle River. And so this map, again, it's official U.S. Military history map, shows you kind of what happened. So the blue arrows is the attempt of the 23rd to cross the Elle River, and we see to the left, we see the 29th doing the same thing. A story that, as I mentioned, is a little bit more covered. There's three arrows really for the 23rd, one for each battalion. The bottom arrow, I'm not going to mention that because that's the 2nd Battalion actually trying to get across the Elle near Berigny, so that's another town. But the two other blue arrows, they are for the 1st Battalion up north and the 2nd Battalion a little further south. So both attempts basically fail. And you might get the impression that for the 1st Battalion up north, things went okay, because you can see their arrow does cross the Elle River, but that's only because the Fallschirmjägers allowed them to. When you read the accounts, the 1st Battalion, 23rd, was crossing the Elle. They were coming up from battalion headquarters, and they were basically in single column crossing the river into the hamlets on the other side, and the Germans just waited and then sprung the trap and flanked them. And the executive officer, the 1st Battalion, describes how he heard Lieutenant Colonel Humphreys on the phone, basically begging for help because they were getting mowed down there by small arms fire. And so he tries to get help, and he calls Colonel Fuller, the regimental commander. And Fuller is really angry that things are not going the way he wants, and so he basically fires Lieutenant Colonel Humphreys in the midst of this battle. And his executive doesn't even want to call him. He's fighting for his life. I don't want to tell the guy he's lost his job. But Colonel Fuller tells him that the regimental executive officer is going to take over, Lieutenant Colonel Hurley Matthews, and that he was supposed to, rendezvous with him at the road junction near his battalion command post. So, he's waiting for Lieutenant Colonel Matthews to show up. Here's a Jeep in the distance, and the Jeep just drives by, zooms by the battalion command post, but he sees Matthews standing on the passenger side of the Jeep, holding onto the windshield with his pistol, in the air, and driving up to where the action is. And battalion executive goes back into the command post, picks up the phone to call Colonel Fuller, but as he's about to call, he hears the Jeep come back, puts back the phone, walks out, sees the Jeep, but no sign of Lieutenant Colonel Matthews. So he asks the driver what happened, And the driver explained that as they were, heading towards where the firing was, that Matthews was shot at. And so Matthews ordered him to stop, jumped out of the Jeep, and kind of rushed over to a wooded area where the shots came from, and more shots rang out, and Matthews didn't come back. So the executive officer of the 23rd Regiment gets killed trying to go save the situation. When eventually, the Italian executive gets to the scene of the battlefield, he describes it as like, scene from a Hollywood movie. American GIs surrounded by Nazi paratroopers that are cutting to pieces, dead bodies everywhere, and their valorous kind of front line holding the front hedgerow. And it's eventually only the help of the 37th Field Artillery Battalion that's going to, stop that German counterattack. And they do hold on to the other side, but that's pretty much it. The bottom, or the second arrow, kind of the one in the middle, there basically, 3rd Battalion sends out a patrol to see where they could go across the river, and especially there's an area where they had been told there was a small bridge, and it was a small bridge near a mill. There are about half a dozen different mills that are located along the Elle River in that area. And here you can see the mill, and a little bit further up the road to the left, there's a small stone bridge. And so they're told, go hold the bridge, and then bring up the rest of the I Company and then the rest of the battalion. But they immediately, end up in crossfire, then get pinned down, and they have to be pulled out, and they don't get across the river. And while this is all is going on, the owner of the mill, who was at the time in her 70s, Angèle Marie, was kind of hiding under the millworks, praying with her rosary and hoping for this to be all over with soon. But seeing that it didn't work out on the 12th, the next day on the 13th, they were going to have to try again. The 23rd lost over 200 men killed, wounded, or missing on that one day trying to get across the Elle. And so they've been battered, and the 38th Infantry Regiment is going to have to do this again. And they're going to have to do it again at Moulin de Rondel, at that particular mill near that little bridge. And the image on the right kind of shows you the area, the fields they would have to go through. Now, in 1944, that was a dry stream bed. This is actually the lead that leads towards the Moulin, kind of to power the wheel, because it was a water mill. But this gives you a bit of an idea of the Elle River Valley and the fields that had to be crossed again on the 13th of June, this time by the 38th Infantry Regiment.
I'm just going to jump in for a second. I don't know whether you'll better understand me or not, Gerd. I want to recap and let you take your breath. So a couple of things I want to point out, folks. So one is, if you want to hear about the 29th Division crossing the Elle River, search back through World War II TV. You'll find one of the original battlefield shows I did with Mike van den Dobbelstein, a Dutchman. This is a Belgian tonight. That was a Dutchman talking about the crossing of the river there. And I also want to mention the fact that Greg Way is watching. Now, Greg is writing a book, or studying the Fallschirmjäger Division 3. So he's saying that those hamlets are all mentioned in the German account. So it's interesting because Gert said this isn't particularly mentioned in the American 2nd Division histories, but it seems that from what Greg is saying, it is mentioned in the 3rd Fallschirmjäger reports, which is interesting because I'll have to put Greg and Gert together at some point so they can chat about this, because filling in the German side is always good. I also want to comment on the fact you're all enjoying it because I'm not talking very much tonight. Is that why you're enjoying it so much? Or is it because Gert is good? Or is it because I'm not talking? Anyway, whatever. I'll let Gert talk in a minute. So just there's the mill. There's the area that was actually dry on D-Day. And see this earth bank here? I'm going to show you a bit of footage from that now. Then I'll hand back to Gert to talk now. It's all yours again, Gert.
So I didn't hear everything there, Paul, but the good thing is I can read, and I want to thank some of the audience for pointing out that I haven't really left a lot of space for people to kind of interject or share anything. I am rattling it off a little bit. I apologize for that, but thank God Paul's there for the little intermezzo. And some of this footage of that valley that you saw on the picture earlier. It's a little bit more overgrown than it was on the picture. To the left, you can see where the American troops would have to enter the valley, and to the right of the image is is basically where the Germans were. As I'm looking at the image now, I see the mill, and so you see the little bridge there, this little stone bridge just past it, and this is a view of the German positions on the other side of the Elle River. So good view of the battlefield. You can clearly see how it's kind of an open field, how the ground kind of goes up again beyond the river, and so again, enemy positions are kind of on higher ground. And you know, in my research, I was desperately trying to find a veteran who had fought there, and unfortunately, I was never able to find one. But I had an amazing discovery, kind of one of the last attempts of finding a voice of what happened there. When I found the family of Charles Schweinberg, and Charles Schweinberg served in C Company of the 38th Infantry Regiment, and he was there in that field at Moulin-d'Hirondelle on the 13th of June. And he has a very, very vivid description of what happened there. And the great thing is that he actually wrote it down in his memoirs, which he wrote maybe like 6 months before he died. And so he talks about going through this field. And I'd like to quickly just read a very short excerpt of his description of what happened there. So almost as soon as we moved out, they opened fire. We were losing men left and right. Soon the line stopped. Now it was even easier for them to hit us. Then a brave man and a friend stood up and shouted, "Follow me." His name was Ted Mister. The entire line stood up and advanced. Ted was almost cut in half by a burst of machine gun fire. I was running at what the Army called high port, with bayonets fixed. The German rifle bullet hit my rifle at the bayonet ring that held it to the rifle, which was directly in front of my chest. It bounced off and hit me in the left upper arm. The shock spun me around and knocked me down. My left arm was paralyzed with my hand open. And so he continues how he's lying on his back in that field there, and kind of lifts his knees, and he puts his Garand rifle on top of it, and he just starts firing up at the hill. He sees his friends just running back, others pinned down. He sees a Sergeant H.G. Wells with a terror and fear in his face, and eventually he pulls himself back up, and he tries to get out of that field. He turns around, tries to go back out of that field, but with the bullet in the arm, he's got difficulties getting up with the embankments of the hedgerows, and finally gets some help and gets out of there. But he was so a witness to what happened there, how machine gun fire opened up. There was also a lot of mortar fire. When we read the accounts, mortar fire that hit that field, and this is a little piece that's left. I don't know if you can see it here, that we found in the battlefield. These are the fins of a mortar round, a German mortar round that kind of still lay around there. So you can imagine, these mortar rounds just exploding all over and causing havoc. In that field, eventually, 11 men were killed, and 24 more would be wounded. So, if you think about 35 men in one company, just one morning, that's a heck of a battle. But they did get across. They did get across thanks to efforts like those of Ted Mister, who was the company runner. Actually, you can see his picture here on the memorial that we erected in 2009 for those 11 men who were killed in that field. And of course, always with hindsight, I wish I would have done the discovery about what happened to the 23rd Infantry Regiment when they tried to take the bridge there, and their names certainly deserve to be on there as well. With the map overlays and all the information we found at Narrow, we added the little map there. And so it's one of those little battles that eventually made a difference, because they got across the Elle, and then the last few battles in Cerisy were, amongst others, the incident at the La Vallée house. Here you see Charles Schweinberg, the man who was wounded in that field, who saw Ted Mister. Story goes that Mister, as he was out there in the field, yelling at people, "Come on, follow me," he was kicking them. He's trying to pull them up. He was really trying to get him to move, and so the individual bravery kind of saved the day. And so eventually, the entire village of Cerisy-la-Forêt is liberated on the 13th of June. But it did take 4 long days of fighting and 2 very bloody days crossing the Elle. Here you see Ted Mister with Charles Schweinberg. As he said, they were good friends. This is a picture taken in Northern Ireland when they were stationed in Northern Ireland. And actually, Charles, after the war, took it upon himself to go see Ted Mister's widow, Anna Mister. And there's a picture of that there as well, where he basically told Anna that her husband died a hero that day, and leaving a widow and also a 4-month-old baby daughter, because Ted Mister had become a father in February of 1944. And here you can see that little girl a few years later, as she receives the Distinguished Service Cross posthumously on behalf of her father there. And that's the lady I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, who I met when I met my very first war orphan when I worked at the Normandy American Cemetery. And and that this is everything that we've discovered. We've discovered, how our father got killed in that field. We discovered that it was part of an offensive. That it was part of a liberation of a village that is not often talked about. And so for her, that gave, of course, quite a bit of closure. And here you can see her at her father's grave. Her father's grave would actually have the wrong date on it, 18 June, which didn't make it any easier to get the light on the story of Cerisy-la-Forêt. But Carolyn, the daughter, decided not to have that changed to 13 June because it was the original headstone, and she wanted to keep the original headstone. And maybe the final point I want to make here about this presentation, about why I wanted to mention the story of Cerisy-la-Forêt. This Battle of Attrition was caused because of many factors, right? We saw the difficulties, the logistical difficulties that they had coming off Omaha Beach. You see that later as well with the storm and the artificial harbor being banged up, and so there were all kinds of problems that made it a battle of attrition. The terrain, the hedgerow country. But I always think, especially when I think of stories like Ted Mister's, that battle of attrition could have probably lasted even longer if it wasn't for acts of bravery like his on the 13th of June, and like those of the men who were with him that day. And I even thought about that deeper when I realized that on the eve of that battle there, Anne Frank wrote in her diary that it was her birthday. It was the last time that she would write in her diary that it was her birthday. And unfortunately, the battle lasted too long for her to be liberated. But I always think about those people who were liberated just in time in the camps, right? Were crying out to be liberated. And maybe they got liberated just in time because of one individual battle like this that kind of, won the Allies an extra day. 13 June was the day the first V1 hit London, killed 6 innocent people. Every day that this battle of attrition lasted was potentially more people dying in London. And so it was through actions like these that that battle was probably shortened as well. So for me, the interest lay in that human interest story there. So Paul, oh my goodness, again, I'm terribly sorry for just rounding it off like that. I did just get a little bit caught up in the story because it's been 15 years of research, and I realized that you haven't had a chance to talk an awful lot, Paul.
I'm having an evening off. I'm having an evening off. It's great. I'm not having to work very hard. It's really easy. I could just go and get a beer. We've got a bit more to go because there's another location that we filmed out you want to talk about. So I'll hand it back to you, Gert. So has Gert frozen? Have I lost Gert?
Yeah, sir. I didn't hear what you were saying, Woody, because I'm really getting bad audio now. But we, when preparing this presentation, we decided to add 2 more short stories, actually pictures, because I think for those of you who've kind of studied maybe Cerisy-la-Forêt a little bit or the 2nd Division, they're kind of 2 famous pictures. And one of them was taken at this chateau, which is very, very close to the Moulin de Rondelle, where this action just took place. You see some of the footage that Paul took there. It belonged to a gentleman named Raymond Lieuteau, who was in the town council at the time and during the occupation. But long story short, across from the chateau was kind of a long driveway with very, very tall trees on either side. And you see a little Gothic chapel that's part of the chateau as well. But under those trees, the 2nd Division command post, divisional command post was set up, General Walter Robertson. This occurred after the Elle River crossing, and they moved the command post there. And it's kind of well known because General Eisenhower came on a visit there on July 2nd, 1944, as he was kind of touring the battlefield, and came to see General Robertson. And I think, Paul, you probably have that picture or some shots. There's a picture, you can see him. So that's where the command post was. You can see the Chateau there kind of in the distance. This is a pre-war postcard. So you got to imagine all the tents there. And so Eisenhower came on a visit there, and you see the tents there, right? Great picture. But Eisenhower came on a visit there, and you see he's talking to one of the soldiers there. You see that little chapel as well that we saw on Paul's footage. You can see in the wartime footage as well. See the jeeps arriving with General Eisenhower. There with General Robertson, General Bradley. And so, Eisenhower immediately, like he always did, went to look for soldiers and chat with soldiers. And he had a tendency to look for soldiers who were from Kansas, and him being a man from Abilene, Kansas. And it turned out that his second cousin was actually serving in the 2nd Infantry Division. And you can see him on the picture here. So it's kind of a funny thing that he ended up bumping into him. And there's other pictures where you see them kind of looking at a hometown newspaper in Abilene, Kansas, and Eisenhower telling him that I just got a letter from your mother, and so they're having kind of some chit chat about back home. And the funny part about the story is that when Eisenhower left, all of the guys who were with Etherington, George Etherington, that was his name, were going like, "Man, why didn't you tell us you were a relative of Eisenhower's?" And he basically said, "Guys, I've been telling you all along. You just didn't want to believe me," kind of thing, right? And so, he turned to, his closest group of guys and says, like, "Yeah, believe me now," kind of thing. So it was kind of a chance encounter where he had an opportunity to kind of get some street credit and tell him that he was connected to the Eisenhower family. Actually, it was Eisenhower's aunt who was Etherington's grandmother. So they were kind of distant, but they knew each other. Actually, they would meet again when Eisenhower was campaigning to become president in Abilene, and kind of met up with George and his family there. So interesting kind of anecdote, side story. Here's another one. This was a really fun one to look into because I was familiar with the picture, but I realized that this picture was taken at the Moulin de Rondel after looking at it long enough. It was taken a lot later, several weeks after that battle took place there that I just mentioned. But the building that you see there in the back is the boulangerie, the bakery that was part of the Moulin. You can see it there. The hedge is hiding the door there a little bit, but you can clearly match up the roof and the side of the building. And one of those great staged photographs, 2 GIs. And I think some of you who are familiar with the 2nd Division will recognize Bernard Dargolles, the French GI who served in the 2nd ID in the intelligence section. And again, great story about the picture because the young girl you see there had all the difficulties in the world, convincing her mother that, that she should go take this picture because the Americans had asked her, so she was a little worried to send her daughter out there just to go take pictures with these GIs, but it turned out okay. And actually, Bernard Dargolles, the GI on the left, met that lady from Cerisy, Mrs. Broussard, on the 40th anniversary, and then again, and they staged that picture again on a couple of occasions, but both now have passed away. Bernard, the middle GI, having lived until the age of 99, passed away, I believe, last year or 2 years ago, very, very recent. But so 2 very, very well-known pictures of the 2nd Division, and both of them taken in Cerisy-la-Forêt. So that was also a great find.
So I'm going to jump in now. So now, folks, we understand the significance of that graph there. We understand that peak there in June, 77 years ago today, was this seemingly small battle in a small location, just one little valley across the Elle. The Elle is barely 6 feet across there, but it cost the lives of 640 casualties, killed and wounded in 4 days, taking this little part of the Elle River. I'm not sure how much Gert can hear me now, but if you've got any questions for Gert, I can put questions for Gert up on screen. So if anyone's got any, he can't hear me, but he can see if I put your questions up, I'll put them on the screen there. So anybody else got anything? Got any questions? Can you see that, Gert? I don't think Gert, can you see that?
I can. Let me see. I can hear you. Are you putting stuff in the chat, Paul? Or
I'm putting stuff on the screen.
So am I seeing questions?
On screen. Look on screen.
I look on the screen. Okay. I'm looking here. I'm going up to see if there's any questions.
So look. No, this is awkward because I can't.
I can barely hear you, Paul. So I'm terribly sorry if I'm making this hard on you.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's good.
I see a comment about if I have written a book. So as I mentioned, 20 years as a battlefield guide, and then of course with all this research, I wanted to do something with it, and so I started the writing process. But geez, I mean, it really takes a special person to write a book. So many people have written books, but it's really quite the task. And I've taken it upon myself to do that task, and I've gotten to about 200 pages. But it's a slow progress, and I do hope that I get somewhere with it because there's a lot of stuff. I had a chance to interview over 24 civilians who saw this all, witnessed it. There's a whole chunk about the occupation of the village. Why did these guys have to liberate this village? What happened there? Some of the things that happened during the occupation. So yeah, let's cross our fingers and hope I get it done one day.
Great. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there because Gert can't hear me. So we've had a fantastic presentation. I'll come back to you in a second, Gert. But in terms of what we got coming up tomorrow, folks, we've got a show from Longève, which is another little town inland from Gold Beach this time. Colin Taylor is the historian on that one. That's the Durham Light Infantry and the 4th, 7th Dragoons. And we'll be talking about battling the Panzer Division. So another attrition, another push inland, another one of those engagements that we're doing again on the anniversary. That was June the 14th. That's tomorrow at 7 o'clock UK time. We're talking about Longève. So don't forget to tune in for that one. As usual, like what we're doing, leave a comment after the show is done. Check us out on Patreon. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook. Share the word. Let people know what we're doing. It's always important to get new people to watch this. But right now, I'm not sure if Gert can hear me, but thank you very much. I'm clapping so he can see me. That was very good, Gert. I don't know why you can't hear me.
I mean, fantastic, everything you've been doing the last 2 years. I mean, you're inspiration for many of our battlefield guides and how you've bounced back. And I can't hear you, but I'm still saying how great you are. So keep up the great work, Paul. Fantastic. And I've seen a lot of colleagues with some fantastic presentations. So kudos. Bravo.
Well, thank you. So if someone said it's just coming to an abrupt end, it's because we can't do our usual chat because Gert can't hear me. So we'll leave it at that, folks. But thank you very much for watching. That was the crossing of the Elle River 77 years ago today. Theodore Mister and the Distinguished Service Cross for it. And there's a little monument there if you want to go and visit. So thank you very much, Gert. Thank you, everybody, for watching me. I'll see you all again tomorrow night.